Thanks for coming out tonight, everyone. We appreciate your presence. Our speakers tonight, John Maass and Marc Warren, have spent years working with mission-driven organizations to fill the knowledge gap in this institution's team and get these unique and complex facilities programmed, designed, constructed, and opened. Marc Warren, founder of Production Matters Consulting and Production Project Management firm, will be speaking. He'll share experiences from opening the Shed, the Lindemann, and he will be proving that production does matter. John Maass, architect, teacher, project leader, and maker of things, founded the consultancy Maass in 2018. He will be sharing his experiences from the Gardner Museum, the Art Museum of Nebraska, and how to bring people to the table. Joseph Auld, Owners Rep, PM, and previous Cultural Facilities Committee co-chair, will be our moderator. Joe is passionate about cultural projects and helps organizations achieve their missions through capital projects. Marc.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And you're going to have to excuse me. I am not a public speaker. This is not what I do. I come from the theatrical world, and I am usually the guy backstage who you never see, and I hope you never hear about, because when I do something wrong, everyone knows about it. When I do everything right, nobody seems to know. And so that has been my life as a production manager, technical director, project manager, director of production, all of the different hats that I've worn throughout my career. So a little bit about my background, a couple of key notable arts projects, because some of what is important about what I bring to the table is how cultural institutions, theaters, performing arts centers, how they function. And typically, the production team are the ones that make it function. There are facilities people, there are marketing, development, box office, front of house, but to turn a production facility alive takes really a lot of hard work from the production team. So a couple of projects that I've worked on that are sort of notable, just to get a little bit about me. Last year, I was the production director for King Lear, directed by Sir Kenneth Branagh, also directed by Rob Ashford, a very famous Broadway director. Joe asked me, because this was a little bit timely, to talk a little bit about my time working on Einstein on the Beach. And as we all know, Robert Wilson, very well-known, very famous director, was his seminal work. First premiered in 1976, played in Avignon at the Metropolitan Opera, brought back for a very famous run at the Brooklyn Academy of Music as part of the Next Wave Festival in 1984. I look at my friend Paul King from BAM. So I did two world tours, one in 1992 as the technical director, and then another one in 2015. Well, why is that important? You take this massively complicated opera, 5 hours long, 8 containers worth of stuff, and you schlep it across the world into all sorts of different performing arts centers, from the Frankfurt Opera House to Teatro Madrid, which is only slightly larger than this room. So understanding how these performing arts centers work is really important to how the facilities are developed. I'm currently I'm the production director for the world premiere, which will open in November at the Shed, of a new work called This World of Tomorrow. It was written by Tom Hanks, directed by Kenny Leon, who just did Othello on Broadway with Denzel. Total superstar team, Broadway caliber designers, really high expectations, working in a space that is essentially what we call a black box, which is a very bare, stripped down, bare version of a performance space. A couple of other things that I think are important to talk about. I was the inaugural director of production for the Lindemann Performing Arts Center, which was at Brown University. Josh Ramus, who I'm sure everyone here knows, the principal of Rex, was the designer of that space. It is, I would call it a cousin space to the Perlman Performing Arts Center, which I'm sure many of you have seen sort of downtown. It had a lot of the same bones, flexible, a static exterior, but a flexible space on the inside. I think the Perlman has something like 100 different configurations, and I could be wrong, that wasn't necessarily my building, but a lot of different configurations, a lot of different ways of setting up the space. Lindemann Performing Arts Center, again, its cousin facility, 5 basic configurations. Why is that important? 100 configurations can become massively overwhelming when you work with artists. Too many choices, too many different directions. How do we develop a work where there are so many choices? Not to say that that's bad, but it does bring a lot of complexity to the process. And of course, last part is I was the inaugural director of production for The Shed and Hudson Yards. Liz Diller was the principal on that. I worked extensively with Liz. Bob Ketcher was one of our principal architects. And David Rockwell and the Rockwell Group was a consulting architect for that. This is a little bit of a visual of King Lear, directed by Ken Brana and Rob Ashford. This took place in the Griffin Theater at the Shed, the 5th floor flexible space. It was originally produced at the Wyndham's by the Ken Brana Company and the Shed, but its original run was at the Wyndham's Theater in the West End of London. Small Edwardian jewel box theater, proscenium, very elegant, very ornate. I think you all can kind of imagine what that would look like, a decorative proscenium arch, boxes, and then it moved into the Griffin at the Shed. Challenge from a facilities perspective is here you had this sort of this scenic installation that took place in a particular space and then was being moved into a wholly different type of environment. Why is that important? Well, working with flexible spaces, and that's something that I've had a lot of experience with, forces you to think in different ways about how to produce and create work to put in front of the audience. So at the Wyndham's, there's a proscenium arch. Everything lived within this classical type of environment. The Shed, not so much. It's a black box. You could see the grid. You could see the walls. It's very stark and bare. So what do? Well, we brought the entire creative team to New York, and we sat down and we really ripped apart what it was that was the basis for the show, and decided to turn the scenery into sculpture. So rather than thinking of it as a piece of scenery, we thought of it as a piece of sculpture. We eliminated the cyc. We created this, if you could see this screen up here was a large projection screen. We used that as the primary vehicle for telling the story, being able to change the environment by being able to put different images onto that screen. So a little bit about how flexible spaces and how flexible spaces have to be thought of in a very different way than a traditional theatrical type of production. A little bit about Einstein on the Beach. I don't know if any of you have seen it. I worked on it in both 1993 and 1992 and 2015. This particular image is the first image from the show, which is called Train. We called Flat Train. And working with Robert Wilson, who was an amazing artist and very much a minimalist, meant that every element that you saw was very important. Like, you can't lose anything in all of the design. Bob often talked about verticals and horizontals. So when you start to think about that and you look at this image, you see the tower that the young boy is standing on top of, the rod of light that is coming down over here, The flat terrain is moving slowly across the space. There's this horizontal light that moves across the back of the site, very precise. Bob painted images. He didn't, when we think of theater, we often think of flow and movement. Bob thought about individual moments, and he would think of them as if he was painting a picture, right? So we could spend, literally, we could spend 8 or 9 hours on this one look, and that would be, as far as Bob was concerned, that's not enough time. Some other images from Einstein on the beach. I don't want to dwell on it too much. This is what was called the trial scene. In 1976, when the show was originally developed, the Patty Hearst kidnapping and trial was very much in the news, and Bob grabbed that image and grabbed that thought and created this scene, which was called the trial scene. And again, you see a lot of horizontal and vertical and diagonal lines. Everything is very crisp, very clean. There's nothing superfluous. This is one of the dance pieces where you again see the horizontal band of light over here. And I'm going quickly because I don't want to bog us down too much. This is the night train scene. Trains were very important. There was a famous book written by an author whose name I don't know, who explained the theory of relativity by using train whistles and different types of elements as a way of explaining what relativity was. And so Bob and Philip Glass, the composer, took those as images and recreated them throughout this 5-hour-long opera. This here is what we would call the spaceship. It's the next to the last scene. You can see a lot of diagonal lines, a lot of vertical lines. There's the vertical elevator right here, the horizontal elevator. That's the young boy that was standing in the tower earlier. So you, again, see all of those lines. And then this is the final scene from the show, which is called Bus, or Knee Play 5. Currently, I just mentioned This World of Tomorrow, written by Tom Hanks and Jim Glossman. This is a rendering by the set designer Derek McLean. This has not been realized yet. This show was written like, and one of the reasons this is interesting, this show was written like a screenplay. Well, what does that mean? You go scenes that are a few lines long, and then it goes to another scene. They're in the elevator, they're in the diner, they're in the 1939 World's Fair, they're in a diner in the 1950s, they're in the future, 2089. The show moves around timelines all over the place. So how do we do this? Most of this is done with video. There are two physical elements, this diner and this chair and table, and then all the rest of this are video elements. These are LED tiles, those are LED tiles, and there are LED tiles in the back. That's how we are able to move this show in front of an audience in a very quick and efficient manner. Now talking a little bit about the shed. I put this slide up here for my good friend Joe Ald. Joe and I and Sandy back there worked on the shed. So before the shed was built, as a way of developing the staff, the operations, Alex Poots, the artistic director and CEO, decided to do Prelude to the Shed. Alex went out with Hans Ulrich Oberst and found an architect named Kunle Adeyemi, a Nigerian architect. And Kunle took the idea of Cedric Price's Funhouse and took that as a way of creating a flexible space that we were able to use as part of a pre-shed opening, in a way of working with artists and working with operations staff and working with security. We got an empty lot on 10th Avenue between 30th and 32nd Street. It was a big empty lot. Frank McCourt, who is on our board, donated this to us. And Joe and I worked together with Kunle. We developed this particular structure here. And the thing that's interesting to think about this structure is this top ceiling part is fixed, but if you notice the lower section here, those are all individual chairs that could be reconfigured, and you could roll all those chairs out and then just have a big open pavilion. So the idea, again, about working in flexible spaces, what does that mean? What does that mean for the artists? We had a choreographer in residence named Tino Segal. He often worked on doing little pop-up events within this structure. We had rap artists, we had cooking classes, we had all sorts of different things that were happening on the site over a month before the shed's construction was actually complete. Talking a little bit about the shed, I think most people here are familiar with the shed. We opened in 2019. The architect, of course, was Liz Diller, Sgraffito and Renfro, and the Rockwell Group were the architects on this. The interesting thing about the shed, and I think something that is germane to our conversation today, was the shed was really designed before there was actually an operator to operate the building. So an RFP was put out by the city, Kate Levin, the commissioner, and correct me if I'm wrong, the commissioner of cultural affairs, put out an RFP about creating a space that artists can work in that was cross-siloed. So Diller Sgraffito developed the space of the shed as part of that RFP, but there was no artistic organization in place to actually operate the building. So in this particular case, architects designed a building without really understanding how it was going. They had an understanding of how it would be used, but the specifics of how it would actually operate was lacking. And so that presented ultimately, not that the design was bad, but it created challenges for the actual operator to, how do we do this? How do we operate the McCourt Theater without dressing rooms, without backstage bathrooms, without seating? Because when the movable part of the building is nested and there's an open outdoor pavilion or space, there's no room for any of that infrastructure. So that infrastructure had to come and go. In New York City, as I'm sure you understand, labor is expensive. The ability to put in stages and bathrooms and seats all have a lot of expenses with them. How do you balance that out? Here's a view of the McCourt. This is the movable part of the building. The McCourt space. Again, this is the movable part of the shed. 110 feet long, 120 feet long, 120 feet, I am so sorry. 110 feet long, 120 feet wide, 110 feet tall. Okay, so that's a massive envelope of a space. This is the opening concert in the McCourt. This is Soundtrack of America. The set was by David Rockwell. David took the idea of this flexible space and created a stage, an actual stage house. The stage that you see back there had dressing rooms, bathrooms, all of the infrastructure that was necessary to do a show was integrated into that space. This was done for economic reasons. This was done as a standing room concert because of economic expectations. And so this is a view of the opening show at the shed. Other space in the shed, there is the fixed building, which is an 8-story tall structure that's part of 15 Hudson Yards. So on level 6 of this fixed building, that's the part of the shed that the movable part of the building straddles over, is the Griffin Theater on level 6. This is the black box theater. So you start to see the deployable seating that we could use, but you also see all of the infrastructure. And the reason I picked this image is you could see all of the infrastructure for the building is wide open and visible to the public. And so when you think about when you're working with artists and thinking about how to develop something for this particular space, rather than fighting the space, you sort of have to accept it. You can't really hide all of these things for a variety of reasons. and probably the most successful installations in this space are installations that accept the architecture of the room rather than try to fight it. On levels 4 and 2 are visual arts galleries. These are big, massive spans, 120 feet long by 75, I believe it's 75 feet long, all open, clear span. I think Liz and the architects team did a really good job. You could see on the floor, there are hard points that allow you to attach columns that actually tie into the ceiling. There's power and data run into the floor boxes. Really good spaces for visual arts installations. They are, however, really big spaces, and they have proved to be expensive to operate, particularly the shed. Like most of the visual arts installations at the shed are very low ticket costs or free to the public. So again, thinking about the economics of these spaces is really important. Okay, Lindemann Performing Arts Center at Brown. I know I'm probably running out of time. Contrary to the shed, the Lindemann was designed very much with the operator, the Brown Arts Institute, very much involved in the process of developing this space. So the Brown Arts Institute, working with the music department, the theater arts department, the visual arts department, the literary department, really worked, I think, very closely with the architects and the design team about articulating what they needed, how they wanted to operate, and how the building could be worked in a very successful way. I talked a little bit before, this is a flexible space. There are 5 different configurations. The main configuration is what's called the orchestra configuration. Backing up a little bit, the original operator of the building was supposed to be the music department. So a lot of attention, and I think this in some ways worked very well for the building's development. The music department, their feelings about acoustics was pretty high, as you can imagine, were pretty high. And we worked really hard to make sure that the acoustics were right. Going back to the shed, the McCourt, which again, some of you may or may not know, the McCourt, which is the movable part of the building, there are plastic pillows made out of ETFE that surround the envelope of the movable part of the building. Well, they're sound permeable. So there were shades that were developed that helped to mask the external acoustics from penetrating into the space. But the acoustics of the space were really challenging. And so that became a challenge for the operators of the shed. Here at Brown, the acoustics in this room are amazing. I would say probably some of the best acoustics I've heard in the United States. So orchestra configuration, 530 seats. There are things called ARPs, acoustic reflector panels, that were on a motion control system. There were 20 of these panels that were able to be reconfigured depending on what the configuration of the room was. There were reflector panels, there were lifts that helped with orchestra sight lines, so you could start to see the orchestra is not on a flat floor. They are tiered all the way around, so the sight lines for the orchestra were really good. And you were able to accomplish that with a push of a button. Recital configuration was a narrower configuration, string quartets, piano concertos, those types of things. Small ensembles, again, very efficient way of closing the space down. That's our second configuration. Third configuration, end stage, simulates a proscenium style configuration, 275 seats. This doesn't have masking, but we could certainly do a wing and border type of masking to create more of a traditional proscenium style theater. Has lights, video, audio capabilities built into the space. So the ability to be able to do these things was fairly efficient. The other thing that we had to keep in mind was that we wanted students to work in this space. So we try to make things looking at it from a university and safety perspective, had to make everything, let's call it student-proof. That it was the kind of thing that students couldn't go and get themselves easily into trouble from a safety perspective. Flat floor, again, we can get rid of all the seating, again, using lifts to move all of the seating out of the space and create an entirely flat floor. This is just a reception. As you will find out as you start to work on some of these cultural buildings, the need for earned income is critical to a lot of these facilities. External events, development events, all those kinds of things are critical for income to be able to support the operations of these spaces. So the ability to create those spaces is really important. Flat floor configuration, you could see this. We also did use this for artistic use. The first thing we did in this space was an art installation by Carrie Mae Weems called The Thought of I forget what it was called. You too. My friend Paul King is here from the Park Avenue Armory where that was originally done. Anyway, this configuration could also be used for art installations, theatrical installations, anything that needed a big open space. And then the last thing, which I think is really fascinating, again, because the roots of this building were developed by the music department. There is a musical genre called ambisonic music. And I don't know if people have ever heard of that term before, but ambisonic music is about being in a totally immersive musical sound space. Now, we see things like the Sphere in Las Vegas that are also an ambisonic-like structure. But here at Brown, we can create the Cube, which is an ambisonic space where new electronic music could be developed specifically for that genre of music. There's only a handful of other spaces in the United States. I know Virginia Tech has one that has these type of capabilities. And in this case, Brown partnered with RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, that had an immersive sound studio right up the block where we were able to develop the work. We would rehearse it in the RISD studios, perfect it as much as we can, and then moved it into the Cube space for actual public presentations. So that's a very quick overview of me and what I've done and some of the projects that I've worked on. So I think now is the time to turn it over to my friend John.
Thanks, Mark. Good to see everybody. Oh, yeah, Maass, John Maass. I teach at Cooper Union. I teach construction management to architects, and we try to go see great architecture because I want them to know like what's it take to do the best stuff. And years ago, we went to go see the Shed, and then a couple years ago, we went to go see the Lindemann Center. And I remember being amazed at the construction. But what I was really amazed was like, who has to run this? Like, who has to actually make this stuff work? And then Joe Auld said, I'd like you to meet this guy. And I was like, holy crap. It's like, it's like you're like a god to me in terms of, I was just shocked at like what it took. They're just remarkably complex buildings. So it's like, it's really fascinating. Maass was started, our company was started a number of years ago, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. We're still relatively small. And we're owners reps, but some parts of that title I fully embrace, and some parts I eschew. I'm not real crazy about what they entail, but we build buildings, and we love building buildings, and we work only with mission-driven institutions solely. We do a very big focus on planning and strategy and programming, a lot of programming. It's really, I think, one thing that kind of sets us apart, and it's one of the things that really sets working with cultural institutions apart. It's something that is genuinely unique to what they do. And we very, very much love being on the very front end of that and participating in that. We talk a lot about project advocacy. What's that mean? A lot of people in our position say we're going to be owners advocates. We're going to advocate for the owner. And I don't think, frankly, the owner necessarily wants that solely. We very much spend a lot of time advocating for our client. There's no doubt about it. But the client actually hired us to build something great. So what we're really advocating for is the project, right? We're trying to do everything that's right for the project to make a great project. I'm always, at some point, going to give bad news to the builder. I'm always going to give some bad news to the design team. And at some point, I'm probably going to give some bad news to the owner to say, this is what's actually needed to do something great. So we try very much to focus on the end goal, make something great that's going to work well. This is the work that we've done over the last 5 or 6 years. You can see many of these things are museums. But there's a couple other things out there that are not museums. Beacon Rock, for instance, McKibben White Mansion on Newport, Pierce Park with the trustees. Unfortunately, a project that's not going to get built, but it was a great project for us to engage in for almost 2 years, where we were dealing with sea level rise and storm surge and things like that in Boston Harbor. Some of these projects are complete. Some of these projects are very much not. But this is what we've been engaged in for quite some time. And before this, I worked for a company, it's a great company, a competitor of mine now, but Paradis Group. I worked on 4 very large projects, major cultural projects, and that's where my foundation comes from. It's almost 15 years with Paradis. And so today I want to focus on just 2 of these projects. We'll never get through but I do want to talk about the Gardner Museum, and I want to talk about Nebraska, because these are about, they're stories to be told about programming, about early planning, about getting to know an owner, about understanding what they want and digging deeper about what they really, really want, and then trying to shape architecture around it. Mark and I spoke a little bit about the shed in this regard, right? It's like, I'm a deep, deep believer in starting with like lots of words. Talk, listen, interrogate, push back, like robust discussion will get you to a brief that is purely what the owner really, really needs, and then build architecture that responds to that. I'm fascinated actually by the shed. I'm not deriding it by any means, but it was something where it's like, there's architecture and it's a tool, and use it. And I think, Mark, you'd say there's some great benefits and some great challenges with that approach. Let's start with the Gardner Museum. People have been to the Gardner? A lot of people, right? So people, if you don't know, Isabella Stewart Gardner curated that museum and said it can never be changed. You cannot move any art in the building. And so what happened, it became to some extent like a one-visit museum. And people there would joke, and we came on board like, why would you come back unless your mother-in-law's in town, right? And so Ann Hawley was the director, and she did something extraordinary. She created these 5 cornerstones. Programming cornerstones. And those cornerstones came from Isabella Gardner and her interests, right? And so what she was doing is she was trying to create more there to come back and see over and over and over again. So this is the overall master plan of the expansion by Renzo Piano. On the right-hand side is the palace, what they consider the palace, or they refer to as the palace. On the left-hand side is Renzo's expansion. And so these programming cornerstones, one of them was historic art, and that really took place in the galleries of before the expansion. And then contemporary art was the second cornerstone. That took place only in a very, very small gallery, maybe 300 square feet, that was dedicated to it up in that corner. So they kind of carved this out. The third one was music, and that was taking place in what they called the tapestry room. They were literally bringing people through the museum, through the galleries, after the museum was closed, 100 people all the way through the galleries to go see a concert, and then bringing them all the way out. It was a security nightmare for them. The fourth one was landscape, and that was primarily taking place or being manifest in the courtyard. And it's world famous, and it's an incredible experience to go, and if you haven't been there, you have to go. It's what Ann Hall used to call the aha moment. You walked into this building, it's a nice building, and then you got to that courtyard, and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then education, and I don't know if there was a dedicated space, to be honest with you, but the point is you could see that the palace was overtaxed. And so this is an institution that grew very organically into needing something else. And so what happened was we wrote a program that was all about these 5 cornerstones and what was needed in order to accommodate them. Historic art was always going to be in the palace. And now it became purely that in a way. It became like this was where the treasures were going to be. And all of these galleries are, again, curated by Isabella Gardner. So it's not only an exercise in seeing the art, it's about an exercise in seeing the mind of a remarkably important woman who was a major collector with all of the scions of that age. Number 2 is contemporary art, and that took place in the Special Exhibition Gallery on the right, but it also took place on the outside of the building where we put these banners. And we put those banners and we thought, oh, this would be great because you can like advertise the shows that you want. And Ann was like, absolutely not. Those are going to be for art, and we're gonna curate that and commission that over and over and over again. And they still do that to this day. The third one is music. That's taking place in this absolutely remarkable performance hall, the Calderwood Hall. If you're going to go and you haven't been there, make sure you're going during the season when this is happening. Production-wise, it's a very simple bit of space, but it's an absolutely incredible experience. Each of these, it's only 300 seats. Each of the balconies only has 1 row. And at the bottom, you can see the performance space and the seating space. There's no boundary. And when I sat there for the very first time, when they had a Far Cry, a performance group, come in, and they're a type of group that stands up. They move around a lot. They're always on the move, and they had to stop in the middle, and they're like, "This is weird," because the person, like an audience member's right there. I'm 3 feet from them. It's very strange, but it was a very, very powerful type of space. Landscape was happening not only in the greenhouses, where they brought a lot of production and care onto the site, but also the Monk's Garden that was done by Michael van Valkenburg, which is really a fantastic space to go visit, and then education, which took place not only in a traditional classroom that was now dedicated to the education department, but also in this space called the living room. So this is just a snapshot of what it took to actually form that. I should say one more thing about that, because she's here. Francie Sagar's in the office, without a doubt, probably the best retail consultant for museums that you can possibly find. Francie, I didn't highlight, and I should have highlighted the retail space there, which was absolutely amazing. Francie taught us a couple things. One, shopping and retail is a cultural experience. You have people who just went to this museum and they've just been moved in a very, very deep way, and they want to take something with them. They want to take something home with them. So anyways, and it's like brings it full circle, because Francie also worked on the Museum of Nebraska Art with us, which was also kind of a very, like, trying to capture the ethos of everything that's at that museum and bring it into this one space and give you something to say, hey, I want to remember this and I want something home to help me do that. This is the Museum of Nebraska Art in Kearney, Nebraska. Just finished this project. This will be published in Architect's newspaper very soon. An amazing 1911 post office that we added onto, added a building about 25,000 square feet. This was done by BVH Architecture and Marc Bacon, who's just an excellent architect. But this was his first museum, so that's pretty odd. Programmatic drivers. What did they want? What did this museum want? And what did they want that was different, that was interesting, that was like making it purely them? Well, of course they wanted more exhibition space. Who doesn't want more exhibition space? Every museum who expands wants more exhibition space. And number two, what do you think it is? They want more exhibition space and they want more storage. Of course, this is like Family Feud. This would be number one and number two. Number three, they wanted a better education space. Number four, they wanted a sculpture garden. They wanted a sculpture landscape, though. They said sculpture garden, and we kind of kept poking at it. And then we'll talk about an event space. We started with this programming effort, and it was just like weeks of interrogating everybody. People who worked there, people who lived there, people on the board, donors, everybody. We spoke to everybody, and we just kept pushing and pushing. And we're like, what does this mean? And we found out a lot of things. We found, first of all, when it came to the exhibition space, they wanted something that had a strong presence, not just a simple white box. They wanted it to be something that felt like the work that they were collecting, something of the landscape is what they spoke about. They wanted storage without apologies. What's that mean? It means that they, every museum apologizes for what's in storage. I'm sorry, we only have 4%. We can only do 6% of what we have. And we said, you should own that, right? Your mission is to collect and protect. Don't shy away from that, but share that. How many people have been in an art storage facility, like where they the racks, right? It's a little bit of like an holy shit moment. I mean, it's like, have you felt that? Like, wow, my God, I see the work in the galleries. Now it's hundreds of these things, right? And it's a little bit overwhelming in terms of seeing that. And we said, well, you should celebrate that. They wanted better education space. And what I mean, like priority of presence, is they wanted, like they had an education space that was a little room down in the basement. And they were saying, could it be a little bigger? Could we have better light? Could we have like another door? Could we have a bigger closet? And we were like, and I'm like, you're just trimming around the edges. What do you really want? I mean, what would make it great? And we started talking to them, and we started to ask them, what's the most important thing you do as a museum? What's the most important thing you do? And they said, right after we collect and we protect and we preserve the art of Nebraska for generations, the next thing was outreach to the community. It's the most important thing we do. Where does that happen? Well, it happens, we try to do it everywhere. It tries in that, there's that education space that no one can find. Can we have better signage to get down there? Well, where would it be if you could put it anywhere? We'd put it in the lobby. We can't put it in the lobby though. Why not? Right? So it's just kind of pushed and pushed and pushed on this, and we realized that what they wanted is they wanted to make sure that everybody saw that education space as soon as they walked in. The sculptural landscape, they wanted something with a strong outward expression. They had a sculpture garden inside walls, and they wanted something that was much, much more present. In the event space, they didn't want an event space. They had no interest in an event space. Right? But this goes to like cultural institutions and what makes them unique. One of the donors walked through the building when he was contemplating a gift. And as he walked through, he walked into this big space that was their event space, but it was also a gallery, and he said, this space is really special to me. I have a lot of personal memories here. My son got married here. Let's keep this space exactly the way it is. And we were like, no. It's exactly, because we were going to use the space for other things, but now we had to preserve this 3,000 square foot space. I forget, we had to preserve it it was a lot of money. He was making a very, very generous donation. And so that's the type of spanner that gets thrown in the works on a relatively regular basis. More exhibition space. This was the major driver of Maass timber, not because it was the material of the moment. Sustainability issues, fantastic. We're very happy to do that, but that wasn't actually the driver. The primary driver was that this ability to feel something of the landscape, to be reminded of the landscape when you're in there. Doesn't mean we don't have white galleries. We have a couple white galleries in there, but there are a lot of natural light in some of those galleries, and that was really what they wanted in terms of having something distinctive. And they also wanted to make sure that you saw this, that when you came up, they wanted you to see art. You wanted to see it immediately. They never, ever wanted you to think that this was any building other than an art museum. The storage space, We didn't do, and this was not a high cost museum. Museums go for 15, 18, $2,000 a square foot. This is well under $1,000 a square foot, probably closer to like $600 to $700 a square foot. All we did was we made the stair going down to the basement a little bit more enjoyable, and we removed a wall and we replaced it with glass. That's all we did. And we said, don't curate it, just let it be. And it's like, I think one of the highlights of the visit. Everyone gets to go down there and see, wow. And it took almost nothing. The education space right here at the entry through this glass, and at the same time, they also took the old postmaster's office, which is called the Postmaster Gallery, and they dedicated it all to education. The landscape before, and why is this important? Here's Mona right here, this block right here. And you see how that's really dark? That's the bricks. That's the Main Street, the old historic Main Street. And this is a major thoroughfare. And they're a gateway. They're a gateway to the downtown, the old historic downtown. And they wanted to make sure they maintained that. This was all parking, right? Our building here, that was all parking, and the city said, and the city owned the parking lot. They gave us the parking lot, and we said, well, we're not gonna keep it too much parking. And they said, it's okay, we'd rather have green space. And the museum said, that's great, we wanna show, we wanna have our collection there, and that's really what drove, the landscape's not grown in this picture, but it's really what drove that entire thing. No walls, no berms around it, nothing, just completely wide open, hoping to invite everybody in. This is that space, the event space that no one wanted. But I will say this, you can't really see it. This dark bar here, that's catering, right next to all the sculpture. That's like they had no space to do it. So we made that much, much better. And we have an event space that they're using, and it's a revenue driver. And so when museums want an event space, I don't begrudge them that. It helps them pay the bills, right? This is the retail space. It's just absolutely incredible. Also by Francie Sagar. We dragged her all the way out to Nebraska. And I think in general, we just gave them like a much, much, much better existence for a relatively low amount of money, I think, generally. Anyway, so we're very proud of that. In closing, in the last couple minutes, we did a session not long ago at a Building Museums conference. We called it Embrace the Chaos. Why museum projects defy easy order and why that's a good thing. Some people were a little bit uncomfortable with the word chaos. I wasn't, because it's a little bit chaotic. This is the project triangle, right? The owner on the top, the architect and design team on the left, and the builder on the right, and that's me in the middle. And people like Elizabeth and Jenny and people who work for me were always running, it seems like. But there we are, right? And in an ideal world, you have your director and you're working on a program, and it should be easy. You have the boss, and the boss is going to give you all the answers, right? But the boss has, we're trying to get a program out of the boss, but the boss has people, chief curator, deputy director, and they also have staff. And the staff has staff. And it's a culture in a museum or a performing arts center where they listen to everybody, right? You could be right out of college, or you could be in a meeting. You could be 21 years old, and you could raise your hand and say, I think you should do this. And guess what? They're going to listen to you, right? You're going to have a say. And that's wonderful. But, oh my God, it's a lot of cooks when it comes to writing a program. And so we're going through those meetings, and we're listening to visitor services and security and facilities and curatorial and like conservation. We're listening to all of them. And they're all writing their own programs. And a program is just a compilation of programs, right? So it becomes very complex. And if the staff wasn't enough, now you have a board. The board's going to have something to say. They're not wallflowers. They have an opinion. And if that's not enough, you're going to have donors. And some of those donors, like we saw in Mona in Nebraska, they're going to come in and they're going to shape your project with a sentence. It was a sentence. That's all he said. And he left. And we're like, oh, didn't count on that, right? So in any case, so they all come together and we write this program. And then we pass out, how many architects are here? You all get this, right? You get the program. And we're doing this, we're passing this on. We're writing the program really, to some extent, of course, it's about trying to give you some direction. It's about giving you a point of entry as an architect to come in and design around a program, but it's a remarkably complex program. But most importantly, we're also taking that program, we're giving it to everyone in the museum. We're saying, read it. Is it right? And inevitably, they're reading it, saying, a director might say, why is this here? I didn't say this. We'll say, we'll walk down the street and speak to your chief curator, because that's exactly what she said. Really? No kidding, right? And it's that interrogation, it's that constant mixing, it's that constant pushing and pulling and trying to understand what all of them, what do they want? But like nothing will kill a project more than changing your mind. So what we're really focused on is making sure they don't change their mind, or they change their mind as little as possible. And so what we're doing is we take that program, we've shaped it as much as we possibly can, and we're passing it on to the design team, and they're going to have their typical set of consultants. But it's a museum, and it's a lot of specialty things to know, and they're going to bring on even more and more consultants, and it's going to get pretty heavy pretty quick, and they're going to have a schedule that they're going to have to keep to, and they're going to have a set of drawings that they're going to have to put together, and they're going to pass that all the way over to the builder. And if you think that the design team is big, the construction team is going to dwarf them. And it's a major effort. And what are we going to ask of the builder besides like miracles? We're going to ask them for a guaranteed maximum price. And incredibly importantly, a lot of people don't get this. No, it's called a guaranteed maximum price, but it's also a guaranteed schedule. And they're going to say, I've got a plan. And hopefully we've hired a great architect. I've got a plan. Whatever you do, please don't change my plan. Please don't get in my way. And we can do anything but not get in their way, right? I mean, and why is that the case, right? Okay, so cultural institutions aren't built to build buildings. They're not. They're meant to provide art for us. They're not in that business, but they have buildings and they have to keep them, right? But their multiple constituencies provide an interrogation needed for excellent programming. That's why it's great. It's hard. It takes a real effort, but that's actually what leads to a great outcome. Number two, cultural building programs reflect the needs of multiple constituencies, making them challenging to satisfy for architects. It is really, really hard. But the good side of that is that the most creative and patient architects and designers are those who embrace those challenges. The ones who have done it over and over and over again, they've done it for a reason. And number three, the owner's inherent desire for excellence and aversion to accepting less than great outcomes challenges the rigor of the construction process. Anne Hawley had a saying, gotta get this right. She said it over and over again, we've gotta get this right. Sometimes I'd say, well, if you wanna make the change to get it right, that's gonna cost you money and it's gonna cost you time. And sometimes she'd be like, we can't do that. Well, a lot of times she and many, many, many people in her role say, yeah, let's do that. Because we got to get it right. It's like ingrained in who they are as museum people, right? So those challenges are nearly always driven by a culture of improvement, and result in a better outcome. That's why we don't always say no. We say, let's think about it, and let's see if it's really worth it in order to do that. And we're not going to go through this. Those are just 3 little lessons, and then there's all this other stuff. All right, I'm sure I'm over time, but thank you. Should I keep this up? Maybe I just take it. I don't think there's anything.
No, we don't need that. Oh, very nice, gentlemen. I'm Joseph Bolt, former co-chair of the Cultural Facilities Committee. Had the pleasure of working with both of these gentlemen in the past. Maybe I should use the microphone. I have a few questions for them to start a conversation, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Okay? First off, could you talk a little bit about patrons and champions of these projects?
Well, I think I'll start. For the shed, the shed had a champion and a patron, and that was Dan Doctoroff. And Dan Dan was an amazing individual. I mean, Dan was the kind of person that would, when things got tough, Dan would write a check, or he would pick up the phone and he would call someone to write a check, or he would pick up the phone and call the contractor and say, pardon me, WTF, like, what's going on here? And he kept everyone's feet to the fire, and it was an honor to, to work with him. He was the deputy mayor under Mike Bloomberg. He is just an amazing individual. So that's my, at least that's my one thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think almost every project has one, at least one. In Toledo, we had this amazing person, and she said, I'll give you 50% of all the money, and I'll chair the committee to find the other 50%. My name won't go on the building. No one's name will go on the building. There was no donor recognition in the building, the Glass Pavilion by Sana, right? An amazing leadership, right? At the Gardner Museum, Barbara Hostetter was the chair of the board. And I don't know what she gave, but it was a very, very sizable amount. And she also chaired that committee to go find the rest of it. The best ones are the ones who say, I believe in the people. I believe in the staff. They know what they want. Speak to them. And I've had those interviews before where they're like, I'll give you 30 minutes, but it's not about what I want, right? And I think that makes a great board member in general. The worst board member is the one who just micromanages everything. The best board member is like, I'm nudging, I'm just pushing, I'm just guiding.
Big picture.
Yeah, they're really like, you know what? It's like, it's not their museum. They realize that. And when it comes to these projects, it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing. I have a vision that is shared by those people who run that museum every day. I'm here to champion that. I'm here to leverage what I have, which is influence and money and good ideas. You know, the best ones, they have a lot of great ideas. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, and I would say there also is that measure of trust. Like the best are the ones that trust the people that are on the ground and doing the work. And they say, I trust Mark, I trust John. If that's what they need, then that's what they need.
Yeah. They know they're paying a lot. They know they're paying a lot. They don't want to be charged more than anybody else would get charged. But it's like this, it's remarkably magnanimous, right? It's like this amazing act of generosity, right? To not only give their own money, but to give their own time to go find more money. You know? So.
Very good point. Okay. Tell us a little bit about capital costs versus operational costs.
Oh, yes. Can I start?
Oh, please. Go you.
My two least favorite words in the English language, value engineered. So in a capital project, at least for me, there are so many times where it's the capital budget is about the build, about the needs. Sometimes it's about the needs of the building, but not the needs of the operation. And so they're very happy to kick that cost down the road. So we don't want to build the loading dock the way, and you'll find my biggest gripe is loading docks. I know that sounds so terrible, but performing arts centers, even visual arts centers, live and breathe through how goods and services move through the building, through a loading dock. I can't tell you how many times they've said, well, I know we really need to have this door here, but we're going to VE that out, and then you could work around it. Well, that workaround is forever, right? And nobody wants to pay for operational costs. You can get people to pay for the capital costs, but not the operational costs. So that's sort of my feeling about that.
It just speaks to the core of the financial model for these projects, right? They're raising lots and lots of money all at one time. And I'm not saying it's easy to raise that money, but people will rally around giving you something that's sexy, right?
I was going to use that
It's
exact
like,
word,
it's
sexy.
like, right? It's, we're working at a project right now. We're doing a fantastic project for them. We're super happy about it. It's people, they're going to line up to give money to that thing because it's like super public, and it's like, it's good. It's like museum doing good work, capital G, capital W. And we just latch on for the ride. We're so happy about like being able to do it. But they're also replacing air handlers. Guess what? No one's interested in giving money to have your name on an air handler that's in a mechanical room, right? So they're raising all of this money. And so we try very hard to like not make value engineering a bad word, but they are going to spend, here's a really good example. Gardner Museum, geothermal wells. And Jim Lawbeck was the director of operations. He's an amazing person, one of my favorite humans on the planet. And Jim, they did a whole analysis, and someone said, in terms of payback time, 4 wells, right? And he's like, well, I want 8 wells. I'm like, Jim, well, first of all, they said, engineers, those guys said 4 wells. And number 2, we really don't want to drill 4 more wells because they're expensive. He said, John, I want you to know that this conversation is the last conversation that we'll be having about geothermal wells. And there's going to be 8 of them. And it was about like just max, and he was thinking about like, the strategy is spend the money now to minimize operational costs down the road. That's exactly what he was thinking. Do people take shortcuts in the interest of the sexy stuff? All day long. And it's our job to help remind them like someone's going to use our name in vain because of this decision that's being made.
Forever.
Thanks for that reminder.
Yeah, at the Lindemann, again, there are gantries that move back and forth. And at some point, they value, and these gantries had bridges that had to be dropped into place to allow access to get into these gantries, both for the public and for the workers. At some point, those were motorized gantries that would fall down into place and lock. And at some point, they value engineered those motorized gantries to save a few dollars. And now what we had to do was hire high riggers in harnesses, specialty workers to go up and put those walkways into place forever. The idea of a student coming and pushing a button was no longer an option. Now it meant bringing in specialty people to do that work every time they wanted to change a configuration. So that goes on forever, right? So, and it's easy for the capital people to say, oh, I want to save, $15 here. We'll make it an operational problem, and then the operational people like me then have to deal with it forever.
Yeah.
So
we have not every project, but some projects you have someone there who's director of facilities, and they know what they're talking about. And they're a pain in everyone's side. And we embrace them wholeheartedly because they're the keepers of that, right? They will look through that design. Do you have any idea what it's got? Here's another one from the Gardner Museum. In the special exhibition space, we didn't dwell on it, but that ceiling, there's a ceiling up there that it's a scrim, and it lowers down. And it can go to 12 feet, 24 feet and 36 feet high. And it was because it was supposed to accommodate lots and lots of different types of art. And there's a big window, and all those windows, every one of those windows has 3 different shades: light dim out, medium dim out, black out. I mean, this is a machine, right? And all of this stuff. And the scrim that goes up and down has fire protection in it, right? So we have to like disconnect the sprinkler, move it up, recharge it, right? Test it like every single time. And I remember when we did that, I don't know if it was Jim or someone else is like, great, I'm so glad that worked out really well because that's the last time we're ever going to move that thing, right? And what the Gardner did, which was brilliant, was that at one point we were actually raising the budget in order to do more. They wanted to do more, and the board had the wherewithal, and they said, we're going to set aside an operational endowment. I believe it was $5 million. I'm not really sure of that. And they wrote it in, no one can touch this money. Director cannot touch this money. The only way that we can touch this money is if the board votes on it. And Mike Holland, who runs that building now, is like, thank God for that money. Because, Renzo would say, you want a Ferrari, you got to pay for a Ferrari, right? And he's given them a Ferrari, and guess what? It's super expensive to maintain. So
Actually, you touched on the next question, which is the importance of, describe and tell us the importance of endowments for maintenance.
yeah, it's a good lead-in, I guess. I don't know what else to say beyond that. Um, it's hard, and we do it on purpose, even though they're hard conversations to have sometimes. But you go back and you want to see how you did. You want to see it, and it's hard to go back and see a building that's not looking great. And a lot of times we will remind like designers and architects who want to do something, and you're like, it's not going to be great. It's not going to be great long term. And we should be doing what's right long term. And so you're trying very hard to think about way down the road. And you want it to be easy to be maintained. And that's where that type of endowment is, I think, it's invaluable. One project we were working on where they're doing those air handlers, they were saying like, we don't know how we're going to raise money for that. And it's a lot. It's a big museum. It's got a lot of stuff, a lot of things that need service. And we said, you know what? Why don't you create an endowment and put a plaque in your lobby that says the maintenance endowment for this building is named by such and such. Put that endowment away. It's going to be maybe 5 times as much as what you actually need to do the repairs. Just draw off it. So.
It's critical. In something like a performing arts center, I think we spent, for the shed, as an example, we spent somewhere in the vicinity of $8 million in theatrical equipment, computerized lighting equipment, sound, audio, motion control, and that was something that was very important to the director, that we had that the building had state-of-the-art equipment. Move forward 5 years without an endowment, and an institution struggles, and there is now no money for that equipment that is now 5 years old and is failing. And so now you're in a very unenviable position of having to, it increases your operational costs exponentially, because now everything is rented, it's expensive, everything starts to break down. Chain motors don't work, things like that. Automation isn't working, and you're constantly, talking to clients, for rental clients. That's an even worse conversation than the internal conversation you have amongst yourselves as to why you can't do something. But one of the things the shed is dependent on now is for earned income from rentals and events. And so when that equipment goes offline because of lack of funds for maintenance, that's a tough conversation when you tell someone that, and they're like, well, I'm spending all this money to rent this space that is supposed to be fully equipped, and now you're telling me it's, those are really hard operational questions. So no doubt, that is sort of critical to the long-term longevity of the building.
It gets to the heart, another just critical factor of working with institutions like this. They think differently about this. They make decisions differently. They are thinking very, very long term. We talk about 100-year buildings, and we describe that to design teams in terms of wall systems and just various construction methods and detailing methods. It's like, is it a 100-year detail? And it's expensive. That's one of the reasons why these buildings become so incredibly expensive. But they got the money now. Spend the money now. Right? And try to make sure that we're not spending massive amounts of money to replace things 20 years down the road or 10 years down the road.
All right, this one I have to read. Talk to us about program desire, architecture limitations, and cost realities.
One of the things that we do early on is this idea that you're looking at the money that you have and programmatically, how much, what do you want in the building? And you can start to do some really, really fast math. I know that all the great architects who have done these types of buildings, they do this math in their head like this. How many square feet and what's your budget? What's your construction budget, right? And they're just quickly doing cost per square foot. And they're immediately saying, $700 a square foot? No, we're not interested, thank you. $1,800 a square foot? Yeah, I'm on board with that, right? And so you're like trying to balance that out. And so like every project, you ask them, what do you want? Let's start, I want this space, I want this much galleries, I want boom, 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 all the different things. And before we get into that detailed programming that we're talking about, we're just doing like the basic stuff. This many square feet, okay, and then we're putting like a grossing factor on it to take care of corridors and elevator rooms and mechanical. We put all that, right? And that's gross square feet, And you want to work with that architect? Okay, well, I know that that architect is doing buildings that are going to trade at whatever, $1,500, $1,800, $2,200 a square foot. Theater, okay, it might be more. Museum might be, so you start to get an idea. What market are you in? Are you in the city? You start to just do that math really quick, and before you know it, you realize they're there, right? They don't meet up. And that's where you start to say, what do you really, really want? And sometimes it's like, we'll get more money. And sometimes it's like, okay, we just got to get more real about what we want. And that's not just about just square footage. It's also about like bells and whistles and what have you. And so like that's one of the critical things that we do is to not only come up with that strategy, but to vehemently stress test it and come up with the right contingencies so that we're not in a bad place.
From my perspective, there's a bit of a tug of war between at least the architects that I've worked with, and again, I'm not being disparaging, but their desire, what their vision is for the architecture compared to what the needs are for the program. And so, when you start to talk about things that are architecturally driven compared to programmatically driven, and what that tug of war, I'm sorry, I'm just using that, and I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but it becomes difficult, and we put people like John in the middle of that conversation, as the owner's rep to help adjudicate those questions, which could be really, or my friend Sandy over there, which could be really complex with a lot of really, and I'm just going to say this, there are a lot of really strong personalities in the room who have very, clear vision of what they want and or what they need. And how to get the best outcome of that is really to a lot of what John was talking about.
This is where project advocacy comes in.
Yeah.
Like you have to go to the owner and you say, actually, you need this. And I've pushed on this before, and you don't want to get rid of this, and you don't want to get rid of this, and you don't want to get rid of this. But what they're talking about right now, if you say no to this, you're going to regret this for a very, very long time. Do not say no to this. Figure it out some other way. Find someone who can give a little more money. Find something else that we can cut out of this. Somewhere loosen it up. And it's really, really hard. It's really, really hard, especially with these types of projects.
Yeah, and then kicking these things down the road, as we've just been talking about, is deadly, because then you have to start, you can't do the work that you want to do because of the constraints that you have been encumbered with.
One word about architects. So, like, there's a reason why these institutions choose these architects, right? They're trying to do something extraordinary. They're trying to make an experience that's fantastic. And in terms of project advocacy, like, they're pushing for something great. They're pushing for something different. They're pushing for what I call like beta testing in architecture. They're doing stuff that hasn't been done before. And a lot of times I get an owner, I kind of roll their eyes a little bit after a while. And I'm like, you know what? They're who they are for a reason. Listen to them. You can always say no, right? You are the owner, and you can always say no. And if you say no if you consider it, we'll champion you all day long. But at least listen to them, right? Because a lot of times they're right. Or maybe something in what they're saying is the right thing to do. And so it's I think it's too easy to like beat up on them, Because the point I was making before, it's not easy what we're asking them to do. It's really, really, really hard. And they're trying to do something great. We were at a conversation a while ago. We're talking about like natural light and art galleries. And one of the guys, a board member, was like, "This, I don't want to have this conversation anymore. Why the hell would you do that? That's just stupid. Why would you put a window in an art gallery?" And I'm like, "Well, you know what? You could do this. If it's all about the art," and that's what he's saying, "it's all about the art." I'm like, "Then, dude, you're wasting your money. Go build a pole barn, okay? Put nothing but white boxes inside of it. Make it perfectly climatized, no windows in it, hyper insulate it. You'll save a lot of money, and people will come in droves, right?" No, they won't, because they're looking for something that uplifts them. And the architecture is what uplifts them. So we like champion architects all day long, within reason. But you know what? They're there for a reason. They're asked to do this for a reason.
Yeah, and I think they bring a vision that would not otherwise
Totally.
be there. You know, I want to talk, like for the Lindemann, for example, Josh Ramus cut through the middle of a theater a glass, sort of a glass box. Now, as a theater professional, what the, you know what? You don't want light coming into a performance space. We need dark. We need light. We need theatrical light. We need, it's process. Why would you do that? The reason was that Josh wanted people to look in and see the process. He wanted there to be that connection between people from the outside of the building and people that are working inside the building. Now, I may not like it as a professional that has to deal with the ramifications of that, but I do appreciate the idea, the notion, what that architect brings to the process.
They challenge us. And sometimes it doesn't work, but a lot of times it does.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you walk in buildings and you're like, whoa.
Yeah, and then you figure out how to make it work.
Now it's the fun time. Questions from the audience.
Production, I supplied an alternate libretto for Satyajit Philip Glass.
For Phil? Uh-huh.
Yeah, English rhyming play about Gandhi, because they got nervous. They went Sanskrit on me, but that's okay. I'm just curious if the producer has any input at that level of the thing. But the point I really want to get to is lighting. In '67, I ran the lights for Stacy Keach's Three Sisters at Yale Rep. It was a board of 19 levers.
Yep.
And I'm flipping. I was a second and a half slow on one. Boy, did I hear it in my ear at that. There was panic in the room, panic in the world. And then the final lighting issue, and I think it was all lighting back in the 60s and 70s. That was what theater was. Steppenwolf won an Obie for a Mishima play. They contracted out the lighting to a guy who I knew and my best friend knew. Steppenwolf gets the Obie, he gets nothing. Can a producer, can they handle the ethics of things like that? Is that part of your job if you see something like that happen?
Producer and ethics. That's an interesting, that could be a whole, that could be a whole separate, that could be a, that could, I think jumbo shrimp, producer ethics. Well, something like Phil and doing something in Sanskrit or, a different language, to me, that always lands in the artist's desire. This speaks to what the artist's intent is. And typically, most producers won't, get involved in that. They would really, I think the feeling is, at least most of the producers I work would be, we're hiring an artist, we're engaging an artist because we believe in that artist, and we will let them, for the most part, do, and I'm talking about nonprofit. I'm not talking about Broadway. We will let them do what they need, sort of what they need to do. In terms of lighting technology I was thinking about this earlier today. I'm of an age, I've been doing this 40 years, where I learned, the first shows I ran, the Miss Firecracker contest at Manhattan Theater Club on the Upper East Side, where I had a 2-scene preset. and Dennis Paraschi was the lighting designer. That is ages ago. Everything is computerized now. There are no incandescent lights, or very little incandescent lights. Everything is LED. Everything is automated fixtures. It is sort of a whole different world where it's not just a designer, there's a programmer. So, as to who, typically the designer, if there's an award, the award would go to the design, should go to the designer. So I think does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I have a question. Board members. And this is a question for John. So, presumably when you have a set of board members that have the same, like, common general goal, things come up and you can kind of send them back to vote on certain things that you need to figure out. Specifically when you're dealing with an owner or group of owners that has a new building. They've never done this before. This isn't a renovation. They're not an expansion. They haven't lived in the space before. How do you handle board members that have kind of like different foundational beliefs on what the building should even be? I mean, generally speaking, like after the first step of like, we need this. How do you delicately kind of send them back to say, like, get on the same,
Get them on board.
General idea,
The short answer is I don't, right? The short answer is that's exactly what the executive director's job is. That said, I've worked with some remarkably powerful and effective directors and some who are not as much. Every project's different. Sometimes I've had board members calling me directly, talking to me, trying to get me to push one way or another. It's unsettling. Like, in a way, it's unsettling. It's like it's bad behavior. You know what I mean? Because it really speaks to, like, there's distrust in the organization. But some of these people are giving leadership, they're giving money, and so I think that what I'm doing, the best thing I can do is that programming process, right? It's, I say to architects, I think sometimes architects hear about the programming and they're like, well, we want to do that. That's what we want to do. And I'm saying to them, I'm not keeping you out by any means. I'm giving you a document that is like a start of a conversation. It's a point of entry for you. We want you to interrogate it, right? What I'm really using it for is to get my owners' act together, right? What I don't want is for an architect to say, you should do this, and for half the board say, yeah, I've been telling you that, all of us should do that, right? And I want to be able to say, there's a reason why we're not doing that. All of that conversation that we had, that's why we're not doing that. You're the owner, you can do whatever you want. However, we just went through a very long and robust process that included 100 people. And this is where we came. And so it's like about trying to like it's about corralling. The programming process is about corralling, defining, interrogating. That's all very, very important. It's probably the best I can do. When it came to, I don't know, same project, name project. I've had projects where I've been called by board members. Like that's the first call I've received is actually from a board member. I've had projects that have had, projects that have had as many as 5 leadership changes in the course of a 5 or 6 year project. No kidding, right? And the only people who are actually surviving that are board members. So I'm very much trying to win their trust, right? I want them to know that I've got their back in many different ways. So it's really different. But the best thing you can do, I think, is just to run a straightforward process and get people to believe in the process and carry it out. So,
This is totally outside of my area, but I think board composition is something that you should pay attention to. In my experience, there are boards that are, that are money people, and then there are boards that have artists, theater, directors, actors that understand what we are trying to achieve. And then there are other board members, and again, no aspersion, but they're like maybe a real estate person, or they have some other area of expertise and they want to be on the board, but they don't necessarily understand what the functionality of what we're trying to achieve is. So I would just say, sort of understand what your audience is when you're talking to a board.
One of the first things I do when I come on a project, I want to know the board. I want to know the major players of the board. I mean, some boards are 40 people big. I want to know the top 10 though. I want it because I have seen projects either be killed or substantially changed through one comment from one powerful board member, right? One board member where people trust him or her, and they say X, and you see it come out of their mouth, and you're like, oh no, no, this is not gonna go well. In one meeting, one phrase, 15 minutes of conversation afterward, and you're like, there's not a lot I can do right here. This is about to spiral out of control. And you're constantly reading the room, you're looking at the director, like, what are you gonna do, man? It's, there's a good, I've seen that happen more than once. So yeah, know your board members, and because they are, some of them are much more powerful through influential than others. It's important to know.
One thing I love is when there's a real estate developer on the board, and he's like, I build my buildings for like $500 square foot. Right. Why is this so expensive? Yeah,
I have a list for that.
We have to do lunch. We have to do lunch about that list.
So actually, that's a good segue. I have a question. So barring hiring an owner's rep, like you, John, or a production project manager, what advice do you have for architects when dealing with clients, with cultural clients, right, who don't have so much experience and maybe have a board that you're not allowed to talk to, for instance? Like, I've been in this situation before, right, where the client is like, no, you can't talk to the board, we're dealing with the board, and then, it's, to your point, might spiral out of control. Like those types of scenarios, do you have any advice or thoughts about that? Barring hiring you, obviously.
Yeah.
Because that would be the first choice.
Someone said to me once, I was going into an interview, and they said, like, don't get trapped into saying what you feel like you want to say. You need to say what they want to hear. You need to know what they want to hear. So my advice is, number one, listen. And number two, convince them that you are a problem solver, because that's why they're coming to you. They have problems, and they need to solve the problems. They need to solve the problems with good design. They need to solve the problems with attracting students. They need to solve the problems with doing it on a budget. They need to solve the problems of dealing with a board member, like addressing board members' concerns. They have myriad problems. I get that asked a lot. Like a lot of young architects are trying to get into the cultural world. I don't know what to tell them, except prove your bona fides and listen.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think I would also try to understand what the ultimate business plan is. And I know this is a little bit complicated because understanding what the business plan for the institution is will help the design, will help all of the things to fall into place.
I don't know if anyone knows Nancy Clappel. Nancy Clappel is a consultant who helps architects and us shape their businesses, find out who they are. She's development, right? She's trying to help people, present yourself well. And she talks about the wee show, right? and it's the we show. We do this and we do that and we do. It's like all about, like architects go in and they're always talking about like everything that they do. And it's a great, great story someone told me once. I think this is true. It came from but this was the California Academy of Science. Andy Clemmer told me this story. He said that Norman Foster showed up one day, and Renzo Piano showed up the next day. And Norman Foster showed up with all these models, many people, many boards. The design, presented a whole design. And Renzo kind of like forgot that what he was there for. He didn't know it was actually like a formal interview. And he sat down with a pad of paper, and he just started listening and drawing, like sketching and sort of like showing that he was listening and processing, right? The bona fide stuff was probably already done by the time he got into the room, but the fact that he listened with humility, and he spoke about like, I've got ideas, and people were like, that idea would address our problem. I get that, right? And obviously he got the job. So, you know, I love that story because it speaks to humility from someone like him, right?
So I have the flip side of that. What is the biggest mistake an architect can make approaching a cultural project?
Yeah, and I would flip it around and just say the opposite of humility is ego. I think that the and that's kind of saying something because so many architects of note, they come with a certain amount of ego. I come with a certain amount of ego. You know, it's like yeah. I think the biggest mistakes that are made is when you lose sight of the overall goal. You lose sight of what the owner is looking for. You know, the owner has provided this opportunity to an architect, not for nothing, right? And that actually, if you pause and you, like the programming process, and you start pushing and poking and really get into it, you'll find that they may not even know it from the beginning. People in Nebraska didn't know it, but they had a very, very interesting problem. And when you really started to ask, like they were looking for something remarkably unique. And I'd like to think we gave them that, but it's like just listening, you know, just listening. And it's like one of the great things that was the great things about working with Marc Bacon at BVH was like just this immense humility. He just came at it with this immense humility. And he was, you know, like, Marc, that doesn't look good. Okay, fine, no, go back. I mean, there's some harsh meetings. Looks like a school. It's terrible. Okay, let's go back. Oh, let's make it out of this. We can't do that. The code says we can't build it out. Let's go back. We'll talk to the building officials. Let's just keep going. Let's keep going. And so it was rarely did Marc, in fact, I had to tell him once or twice, just stand up for that, because that's a good idea. You don't back down on that. You know, I got your back during this next meeting. Stand up for it, because it's the right thing to do. Okay. You know, so I just felt like he just was like, he was all about that owner. He was all about that owner every step of the way.
How has the capital planning conversation at performing arts institutions changed post-COVID? Sorry, how has the capital planning conversation? How have the capital planning conversations changed at performing arts institutions post-COVID? How have you found them to have changed?
At where? Sorry?
In
Oh, how does? Oh,
in cultural
I can just do it without the microphone. Post-COVID, capital planning conversations at performing arts institutions. How have you found that conversation has changed since 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think those conversations have gotten really hard. I think this is speaking for myself, I think post-COVID, a lot of arts organizations, performing arts organizations are really struggling. And so I think people got used to not going to the theater. People got used to consuming Netflix and Apple TV and all those kinds of things. And so bringing them back to the performing arts has been challenging. And the knock-on effect of that is there's not a lot of money. And so, theaters, performing arts institutions are all, everyone I talk to are struggling. And a lot of the, even a lot of the things, let's call them the positives that came out of COVID, like less stressful. There's the whole movement around in theater about 10 out of 12s. That's 12-hour days and working 6 days a week. A lot of those things started to loosen coming out of COVID, and we're sort of right back to that. And so budgets are tighter, audiences are not coming back, there's less programming, and so I think that those conversations and the cost of technology continues to skyrocket. Most of the LED technology comes from China, right? There's huge tariffs that are being placed on, and I'm sure in my world, I'm building a set for a show that I'm doing, and every day I'm hearing, well, we got to get this order in, or else, we're going to be hit with tariffs because we have to get LED tape from China, or or whatever. So the knock-on effects of that are sort of devastating in my opinion, in the performing arts.
Yeah, I think the media outlets, they saw an opening there and they grabbed it at COVID, right? The Netflix of the world and what have you. They just, and Apple, all of them did. I don't necessarily, they blame them. They were serving a need. And what happened was people were like, they got used to it. They got bigger TVs, they got better sound systems, and they're like, my God, it's just like being at the movies. There's been a big movement, I think, in the museum world about like moving closer to being a community center, right? When we went to Mona, the director immediately said, that guy over there in the auto repair, I need him in here. I need his family in here. Tattoo artist, I need her in here. Gas station attendant over there, need them in here. And it was about, and we've been trying to do that with art. They're not interested. It's just not their thing. But if I can provide a game night that's free pizza, and if I can provide something for them to do, and I get them in the door, I'll worry about the art later. I need to get them in the door. And I really appreciated that. Like the very, very hard job of audiences, especially in off markets. In the city, like, look, museums are always going to have plenty of people in New York City and Boston and Philadelphia, that's going to happen. But those areas, to me, that's the better story. That's the better story to tell. How are they doing it? So.
I think in the performing arts, what you're going to see is more a shift towards more immersive work. And so, like at the Shed right now, I worked on a piece called Viola's Room that came over from the UK by a group called Punch Drunk, which you can't consume something like that on TV. You have to be there. You have to feel it. You have to smell it. You have to take off your shoes. You have to become part of the installation. And I see a lot more of that happening, both in the visual arts and in the performing arts, as a way of breaking down that consuming of just something that's on a screen. Yeah. And it's those kinds of things that, this unsiloing of visual art, performing art, performance art that will help to bring people together for a shared experience.
Yeah, and for those who are into experiences, go see it. Go experience it. It's completely enveloping. Viola's Room, it's fantastic. It's funny, my wife, she was so moved. She said, let's go again. And I said, I don't want to go again, because part of it is you don't know what's coming. And when you know what's coming, it's very, very different. So enjoy the first experience. It was very different from Punch Drunk's.
Here we are, or Here No More.
Yes, Sleep No More.
Sleep No More.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very different, because it was. You couldn't possibly absorb everything over multiple floors over whatever 2 hours. Anyways,
it's like being part of a dream. It's like being part of a dream.
So great. Yeah. And for me, the biggest change has been a focus on mental health by far. It's constantly being discussed. We finally realize how important it is, and we're all dealing with it. We were dealing with it before, but we never talked about it. So.
go out and be with people.
It's important, right?
Go out and be with people.
It's important. Any more? Okay. Thank you for coming. Thank you.